what we are going to do is a quick review, but not a whole review of the book. What we're going to do is go back and review 22 that leads up so that we can see where we're at when we hit 23. And we're going to begin to build a timeline. This, believe it or not, pretend it's a long timeline. It's a timeline with columns because we're going to put in events that happen on each of these different days so that you can see when which day what happens. Now, the first thing I want to point out to you is that on each day, like for instance, I marked the first one, Passover, which is Nisan 14. I marked it, as you see, with 2 columns. And the reason for that is, in the Hebrew reasoning of days, they reason according to what Genesis 1 teaches. Now, I think it was last week she took us into Genesis, or maybe it was in our reading. That's what it was, in our homework reading. And she said, remember how the Hebrew calendar is set up, how they reason timing, right? Because that really, this is one of the reasons it's so hard for us as Gentiles to figure out what days things happen on, because it doesn't click with us. We start our days when? Right now, this morning. This is the beginning of a new day. This is Monday. But guess what? The Jewish people would say, when did Monday start? Last night at about 6 o'clock. But by the time we were sitting down for dinner yesterday, it was the beginning of their new day, their new week. Of course, and they also have different weeks than we do. But with that aside, what we're going to do is this. We are going to go back. Remember in Genesis 1, verse 5? I want someone to read that for me. Can you find that really quick? Have your Bibles handy because we're going to be doing some cross-referencing on occasion here. And also, you might want to pull out your observation worksheets that Kay gave to you, where she gave you some synoptics to look at. Okay, and go back and read Genesis 5:1, and it's just an excerpt out of it, but you won't have any problem being right where we're at in it, because it's familiar. 1:5. Yes, so sorry. Yeah, 1:5. So sorry. Thank you.
And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day.
Okay, so how does God reckon a day? There was evening and there was morning one day. So here's what we're going to do up here on this board in order to make this make sense to you. I'm going to put a little moon up here, and then I'm going to put a sun over here. Okay? So that you can understand that is one day. Now, if we had our English calendar, our U.S. calendar that we use, we would say this begins the day, right? And so that these 2 columns would be in one day, but it's not with the Jewish thinking. Hebrew calendars, they start at night. So put up here a reference for yourself, Genesis 1:5, evening and morning, one day. Okay? So that's how you know the reckoning of your time. So what we can do then is we can go over here and do the same thing. We can say this is evening, right? And this is morning. And I'm just doing that visibly so that as we look at the events that are happening with Jesus, we get them correct in our thinking. Okay, that little moon there, kind of wimpy, huh? But I think you understand what I'm saying. Okay, I'm going to do it over here. And you're going to see why these are important later as we start adding in information. It's important for you to be able to count your days and see how everything falls in the right order. Okay. All right, so that establishes our first step, evening and morning, evening and morning, evening and morning. So we're going to go back here to Luke 22 when we have the day previous to what we're looking at in 23, right? We're going to start in 22 as a review so that our first column, which is the day, we are going to look to see what is transpiring on that day. So Luke 22, what happens in that particular chapter? What was your title for 22? Did you title your chapter? Okay, give me your title.
I put Jesus celebrates Passover and moves towards the cross.
Okay, and moves towards the cross. Okay, that's good. That he does move toward the cross as he. Well,
We don't share our titles.
no, I like it. Well, I like it. It's just I'm trying. So, too, but what is it that leads him to the cross? It might be better to clarify what it is you're speaking of. How come he's heading toward the cross in 22? There's a trial, right? It's a betrayal and a trial that begins. So I think that it would be beneficial to understand that 22's focus in there is how he is betrayed, and then a trial begins to ensue. There's also another event that occurs in this chapter that's really important. Thank you. Very good. The Passover. I knew if I waited long enough, somebody would come up with it. Because Passover, meal that he has with them is significant. And it can be also a little bit confusing for us because we understand that Jesus is the Passover lamb, and yet he's eating the Passover meal. And so how does this happen? Um, I heard a sermon this week, first time I've ever heard this explanation, and I did tell it to you guys I think last week, but this particular pastor said, his name was Skip, and he said Josephus records that there were two calendars in operation in the days when Jesus was uh, alive and about to go to the cross. The Galilean area, which kind of makes sense because you and I, when we did our Kings and Prophets study, we saw how Israel was divided to the north and the south, right? And how the northern in particular went very wonky on everything that they did, not just their worship, but everything. But it seems like apparently they also instituted whoever their rule was at that time. In this case, it's maybe a Babylonian. I don't know what calendar it was. He didn't say. He just said they used a different calendar, and their calendar was one day ahead of the one in Judea. So, in this is how I reasoned it in my head to make sense. It's like time zones. We have time zones as you move across the United States, right? So if you call an hour at 9 o'clock here and you call somewhere in New York, it's going to be an hour earlier or later. It's going to be an hour later there, right? So I'm thinking that's kind of the thinking on it. They had their own calendar and it made them one day ahead of the ones in Judea. And after he said that, I went, that is the first time I've had a thought process that really kind of helps me clarify how this unfolded. How is it that Jesus had his Passover before and then still was the Passover? So I'm still looking to verify, though. And as you know, when a pastor gives a sermon, they don't say it's in this book on this page and blah, 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 right? I happen to have in my library the works of Josephus. I don't know if they're all his works, but it just says works of Josephus. This one is volume 4. It took me a while. I spent quite a bit of time yesterday going through. Of course, this is the last volume. And where do you think it was? In the last volume. So I had to go through all those others. But I've narrowed it down to this one. I've got a couple of pages marked that I think I'm getting close to the area where it might be recorded. I'm looking to confirm that statement myself, that Josephus said that this calendar system existed. Yes.
When we did John, you went through all this, and somewhere you found that there were 2 days that you could celebrate Passover, either
Well,
Wednesday
yes.
or
Right. Good memory, Kathleen. And here's why I had said that. It's because we reckon our days sun up to sundown, where now I'm going to show you how they don't reckon it that way. They do it from sundown to sundown, which does push it back, which is interesting. So if in Luke 22 we see Jesus is going to have them prepare, right? What does he say? Let's look at it together. Um, Jesus picks 2 disciples to go and prepare, right? Do you remember why he does that? That's in Luke 22, 7 to 13. In 7 to 13 of Luke 22, Jesus sends 2 disciples to prepare the Passover. Whoops. Okay. And do you remember why I told you that he probably picked those 2? Yes, right, because remember, what was Judas trying to do according to the opening of 22? Try to set him up. He had said he had already made an agreement with the Sanhedrin and the other leaders that he was going to find an opportune time to betray him. And one of the things that we discussed last week about the Passover was once they go in to have the Passover meal, what's required of them is to stay put. Right? Because the whole thing is venturing in their minds. It's a remembrance meal. So it doesn't have to be super legalistic, but it does have to be done in a way that fulfills the understanding of what they're doing. In the days of their Egyptian captivity, and God was going to bring them out, he told them in that day before he was going to bring that last plague to do what? Kill a lamb and do what with the blood? Put over the doorpost, right? And then what was going to happen? That's right. The destroyer was going to come, and when he saw the blood on the doorpost, he would pass over. So in the daytime, they were preparing that, and at night, what happened? The Passover angel came and passed over them. But so here they are in the daytime, and what we see here is Judas understands that when they go in for this meal, it's an opportune time. If he wants to, he could easily bring his soldiers and come in and easily arrest not only Jesus, but all of them at one time. It could have been a real problem for the whole group, right? And so I think Jesus specifically picked out Peter and John. This is my assessment. I mean, it isn't written in the scripture, but it looks like it's strategic to me on the part of Jesus. So he sends them. He says he sends 2 disciples to prepare that they will eat the Passover. And then what does he say? He says about the Passover, for I desire greatly to participate in this meal with you, right, at this time. All right, so that's in 22, 7 to 13 gives you the whole storyline, yeah. And did you say 15? And he said to them, I earnestly desire to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. So he, in his mind, is celebrating Passover as a form of remembrance to what happened previously. So he sends them, they prepare the Passover. Then you move on down there. He talks about in 24 to 27, the disciples have this silly little dispute about who's going to be greater, right? And Jesus basically demonstrates to them how that is not the attitude of the mindset. He wants them to see themselves as servants. And then, of course, he himself becomes a servant. And it doesn't say it in here, but he gets up and he washes their feet, right? It's in one of the other Gospels. I think it's in John. All right. And then we go on. Talks about in 35 to 38 about how they're going to go out after he's now leaving them, right? They're going to continue to journey around and spread the gospel. But before he had told them, when you go, don't take anything with you, right? But now he says, now I want you to take provisions with you, and I want you to take a sword. So it's an interesting dynamics change. And why did we say that was a switch for him? What was the purpose in switching in how he wants us to go out as missionaries?
He's not going to be with them to protect them, nor could they mess up his needs when he was alive. And so it's a different dynamic.
Right. What was going to be the problem for his mission as the Messiah on earth? What was going to happen if his disciples carried around swords with them while he was in his earthly ministry. There you go. It would look like they were revolutionary rather than a peaceful ministry. And he wanted to convey himself as Savior, and that he came in peace, but later he says, but I didn't come to bring peace, right? I came to bring a sword, but it's a different kind of sword. It's the kind of sword that occurs in relationships of pitting one against another. So he said that much earlier in one of his other teachings. But now he says, now I want you to understand I'm leaving, and I'm leaving you vulnerable as sheep among wolves. And so I want you to be prepared for this. And so when you go, you are to prepare. Make all your strategic planning. You go with a mission of salvation, but don't go unwisely without protection, right? So you do plan. You do take your sword if necessary, right? If you think you're going to need a sword where you're going, whatever that concept might mean, you take that with you, okay? All right, so I think that's interesting, though, because I've never heard anybody preach on that. And I'm thinking to myself, that's wisdom. God released them from that old concept so that they now know you're in a vulnerable world. You're vulnerable in this world, and you can be attacked, and there are going to be enemies that'll come against you. So when you go into the mission field, be smart, right? Right? I love that. Okay, now.
The question I had was later, one of those around him saw what was going to happen and said, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the slave of the high priest.
Yeah.
So he had a sword with him.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking Jesus just told them.
Yeah. Well, they apparently, wherever they were staying at that time, there was a sword in that house. It'd be like if you came to my house, there would definitely be a sword in my house of sorts. Right. And so they had access to one, so he started carrying one, or he had one in his possession. Yeah. And so he had it, and then he used it, but he was premature. And so then Jesus said, no, no, no. And then, because what was the reason, where was Jesus headed? To the cross. He wants to die. He understands he will die. How many times has he told them, or has he told them, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to go to a cross, they're going to crucify me, they're going to scourge me, right? But I'm also going to rise again from the dead. And he's told them all this. But we talked last week about the fact that a lot of this was not comprehended by them. Why?
They could have told them they wouldn't. Well, he told us as a reader, they could not understand.
They couldn't understand because who was withholding that? God himself, or Jesus himself, was withholding that full understanding. Why? There you go. Again, because the mission had to be accomplished. So when you hit the garden, and Peter has just been released by Jesus in his last words to him in that upper room where they were having dinner, and he says, now when you go, I want you to know, go prepared, be smart, carry your weapons, take your provisions, do all these things. But certainly the message is not changed. It's a message of love. It's a message of salvation. It's a message of a coming kingdom where there will be no more tears and sorrow or all these things. But don't go unprepared, because I'm leaving you in a world where you are sheep among wolves. And so Peter prematurely then has got his, of course, Peter, he's the ambitious, he's like me, leap before you look, right? But he has his little sword. Oh, I've got my sword. Whack, right? Because he had just been released, so he was ready. He had already obeyed Jesus. In many ways, it was kind of, an overzealous obedience, but it was improper in its timing for Jesus's cause, right? Okay, so Jesus fixes it by healing the man and telling Peter, not yet, right? After the death, burial, resurrection, as these disciples begin to walk in this faith, this new faith that eventually will come to its fullness, they'll start remembering and recalling all these things that Jesus had told them and all the things that they have been taught, and they'll begin to make sense of it then. But at the time, there was still a shadow kind of that God himself had put over their minds to withhold full understanding until the work was done on the cross, because he did not want his disciples or other followers to interfere with that. Okay? All right, so that's that explanation. Any other questions in that 22? Okay, so now we go on. We see Peter then denies him. Okay, he sends them okay, here we are here. They're having the Lord's Supper. Let's put it here. We call it the Lord's Supper. So I'm using our English because that makes best for us. That's Luke 22, and it's verses, let's see, let me get it on here, 14 to 23, right? All right, and we see Peter in that evening event. The next thing we see here is, what does Peter do? Before that, what happens to Jesus? They have the supper. There's a conversation with Judas, right? He tells Judas, go do what you're going to do, right? Then what does Jesus do after the meal? Yes. So in verse 39, it says, and Jesus came out. So he was at this Lord's Supper in the upper room. So I'm going to put a little house here to show you this is the upper room, right? And now he's going to come out and he's going to go to the Mount of Olives. He goes there to pray. And that is, let me see, verse 39 to 46, right? All right. Here's what I have I've been thinking this all through a little bit myself. Okay, the point was the Lord's Supper, just like we take the Lord's Supper, it's in remembrance. So they didn't have to legalistically stay in that room all night, but who did originally? The Jews did the night that the Passover was happening, the original Passover. They had to stay in that room until the next morning. It's in remembrance of the Passover. They went into the other room. The thing is here, what you got to remember is he's not in his own house, right? So where's he going to sleep? Right. They would either be standing up all night and looking at each other in this upper room, because it's an upper room. It's not a bedroom. It's not set up for company to sleep. It's a place to go and eat that this man had provided for him. So what I see is that they fulfilled the full practice of the meal in remembrance of what happened that whole night. And when they were finished, then he went to the garden to pray, which is where he was also sleeping. They apparently had their camping area right in that area, and that's where they went to sleep. So you don't have, I think this is a great example of how even the church today often gets so legalistic about things like, is it wine or grape juice, right? And it's like, that's not the point. The point is, you're taking this meal what? In remembrance. This is hundreds of years later. They're doing it in remembrance of what happened that night. On that night, God said, you stay in there the whole time. Now, what they do is they stay in there the whole time for the meal until the meal is completely completed, and they've done a full remembrance of that night. And what had happened through the generations is they had developed what's called today a Seder meal, and they had sort of a process that they go through, and it takes them several hours. The family gathers, they do prepare for the meal. Now, when he's preparing for the meal, the Passover meal, what does that mean Peter was doing here concerning the lamb? Yeah, he was killing that lamb, right? So I'm going to give you a little lamb here so you can remember. He has to kill his lamb to prepare that Passover meal, right? So that lamb has to be killed, and then that night they eat it. Okay? So, and because what we think is this difference in calendars that Galilee used versus what Judea used, because Jesus came in from Galilee, he was allowed to use the Galilean calendar, and he was able to do his Passover on their calendar date, which was these 2 days, okay? Preparation day and then the Passover day. But it overlaps in many ways, which is kind of cool, because even though he's a day ahead of the people in Judea on him killing his lamb, he is eating his meal on the beginning of what day? Passover, Nisan 14. So he's actually eating it on the Passover day. It's at night, but it's their day.
Well, Katie, I was going to say that even in Jesus' time, they weren't putting the blood on the.
And they weren't putting
So it was just
symbolic.
reenacting the whole thing.
No, no. And that's what's important. And my reason for taking you back to Exodus and reading the fact that they had to stay in the room the whole time and all that is because I wanted you to catch the concept that Judas thought, because when they were in for this Passover meal, he figured he could send the soldiers in, because until that meal was over, which was going to be several hours long, he knew he could catch him in that room. Once the meal is over, then he goes to pray in the mountain. Obviously, that's not a sin. It's obviously not breaking that Sabbath, because this is done in remembrance. Okay? But he knew as long as the Passover supper was going on, that he could catch him if he wanted to. Judas could. And so Jesus, when he sends Peter and John to prepare for the Passover, he doesn't inform Judas of what's going on until they're there. And now Judas can't go and tell someone. So that then while he's at the supper with Jesus, then Jesus leans over to Judas and says, now you can go and do what you're going to do. Now you can do what Satan has entered your heart for. And he gives him permission basically to exit the room. And Jesus himself also exits. So you know he's not breaking or violating anything. The supper was fully recognized in remembrance of what occurred hundreds of years ago, right? And so now he goes to the Mount of Olives to pray. All right. So now we're in the night. But what day are we in for the Hebrew calendar? We've moved to a new day. Over here, this would be Nisan 13. Right? Because if they're using the Galilean calendar, if that's true, and I don't know if it is, but and I'm just going to put a big question mark next to that, but it does explain it. And it's the first time I've had an explanation that I went, I feel better now, because I've always struggled with this. How did Jesus kill his lamb a day early? It's because he was using a different calendar.
What's the other one?
I don't know.
No, the regular one?
I would be the Judean calendar, because they're in Judea, right, for Jerusalem. And so all those in Jerusalem where he went to do this, they're all under the Judean calendar, but he came in under the Galilean, and I probably spelled that wrong, but you tell me. But anyway, Galilean calendar. Okay, now, Lord's Supper, goes to the Mount of Olives to pray, and then what happens? Arrested. Okay. About midnight. Is that what it says? Did it actually give us that? What is the reference on that? Do you have it? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you should about midnight. Okay. All right. Well, it had to be late because they had a full supper, and then he had gone to the Mount of Olives to pray. And we got to see last week, as we looked through that text, of the dilemma that he kept having with his disciples falling asleep, right? He was right. I love that. As a matter of fact, to me, that's a real profound statement, don't you think? That it kind of shows the nefarious work that was going on there, and that Jesus was recognizing that basically this was a satanic move on their part, that they would come at night. But there's another little hint about that too, because they come to him at night, about midnight, they arrest him, and then what do they begin to do? They take him where? So they take him to the high priest's home, and what ensues after that? They arrest him, and then what do they do? They begin to put him on trial. He's put on trial, right? And it's by the Jewish leaders, right? Nope. That's the whole point. He says, You do this. He says, while I was with you, verse 53 of 22, while I was with you daily in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this hour and the power of darkness are yours. Having arrested him, they led him away and brought him to the house of the high priest, but Peter was following at a distance. After they had kindled a fire, so it's dark still, right, in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter was sitting among them. And then you see Peter's denial, right? So this happens here also. You can put on here Peter's denial. Okay, and that's 54 to 62. All right, that's also of chapter 22. Okay, so he's put on trial by the Jewish leaders, and it is night. You might want to put a special note of that verse 53, because he makes a point of reminding them it's night. Now, why would that be? What does anybody know anything about the Jewish law system concerning trials?
It was illegal for the council to meet during the night.
Okay. They couldn't even meet during the night, let alone do what? Try somebody at night. Because what do you think, even just in our American judicial system, what is the point of having a daytime court system meet rather than in the middle of the night? So that it's in the public, so that it's out in the air. So in a way, it's again, it's like, you have to do it by under the cover of darkness. And what was it that we said at the beginning of this chapter was their problem? Who were these leaders afraid of? The people. What did the general population think about Jesus and his ministry? They liked it, right? Even if they didn't understand the truth behind it, they certainly liked being resurrected from the dead. Right? And they certainly liked having healings. And they sure liked the bread and the fish and the loaves that were provided for them when they were hungry. So even if they didn't understand the message, they liked the things that Jesus was doing. And then amongst those were some who actually got the message, and they were in favor of Jesus and what he was preaching and teaching. So, and the other thing, some of them even just liked the stories. They said that in one of the places, that they just enjoyed the storyline. Okay, so here we are. It is middle of the night. Jesus has had his Lord's Supper. He's arrested and he's put on trial by the Jewish leaders. And this all takes place on the night of Nisan 14. Now, why is Nisan 14 important? Because according to the Hebrew writing of God through Moses, what does Nisan 14 mark? It's the beginning of the Passover feast. Now, when we talk about the word Passover in Scripture, often sometimes it is a specific day for a specific event. Sometimes they speak of it as a general thing for that whole holiday period. It's kind of like we say, well, at Christmas time, blah, 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 right? And for us, it can be any time. It doesn't mean just December 25th. It means, oh, well, no, I didn't mean December 25th. I mean, we're going to do it the week before, or we're going to do it the week after, but during Christmas, we're going to do this. So when they call Passover in Scripture, sometimes it's a general term. Sometimes it's specific. Certainly when you go back to Exodus and look at it, when he says Nisan 14th, at twilight on Nisan 14, you do this and this and this, right? So it's really important that you understand that they were doing exactly according to the calendar with Jesus here. As he is, although he's prepared his meal, he's already eaten his meal, but now he's arrested, now he's put on trial. Peter has his denial toward the end of this chapter. Then we go into verse 63 to 65 of 22, and what we saw there was Jesus was held in custody, right, by the Sanhedrin. What was it that they did to him there? Yeah, they beat him and they mocked him, they blasphemed him through this whole thing, right? And at the end of it, they concluded that the charge against him primarily was what? What did they say he had done that was so horrendous that they wanted him dead? He is God. So in a way, it's very interesting. They blaspheme him for for saying that he was God. And in fact, he was God, and therefore they were the ones who were doing what? Blaspheming. They were denying him. It's very interesting. It's almost irony in some of this, right? All right. So now what happens in 66, we have a change, though. What happens in verse 66 of 22? What are those first few words there? When it was day. So now we're moving into day, correct? Yes?
They went from Annas to Caiaphas' house. Annas was the old high priest.
Yes.
And then they went to Caiaphas, the current high priest.
Yes.
And then they went from there to the Praetorium in the light of day.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah. And I'm not, and if I had room, and I think I might have been Becky I was talking to, but I'm going to tell you guys, I'm laying out a way for you to visually see this, that when you go home, you could take this and put much more details in this. You could go in and plug in every single point that you can think of. All the orders, all the events, all the places, I'm trying to hit the chunky pieces that are most obvious that you will remember, and I'm trying to get them in the right place. This is nighttime of Nisan 14 when Jesus has the Lord's Supper and is arrested and put on trial by the Jewish leaders. Now we're coming and it's daytime. According to 22, was it 66? Okay, so now we're at daytime, and now he's going to continue with this trial. We go into 23, so 66, he goes to the council of the elders of the people assembled, both chief priests and scribes. They led him away to their council chamber, saying, if you are the Christ, tell us this. So that's where in the daytime he makes his confession. They convict him, right? So the council convicts him. The Jewish council convicts him of blasphemy. All right. And so and that was basically the last sentence, I think. 2271. All right. Now, what follows that? Yep. So now we go into chapter 23. Then the whole body of them got up and brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him. So now here's that sequence that you just laid out for us, Kathleen, where now he's going to see Sanhedrin and Pilate and Herod and then come back to Pilate again. And I've got it on my chart, but I'm not going to write it because I don't want to take up too much space. But the Jewish council convicts him. Then he goes to the Roman council. Roman leaders, right? What do they do when he sees them? Do they convict him? No, they actually do what? And also Herod. They find no guilt in him that's worthy of death, right? Yes, and it's 3 times. I like that you caught that. And there's some really good insights on just it's like there's these spiritual things that go on within the written word of God that are subtleties. You don't necessarily pick them up right away, but if you're paying really close attention, 3 times he makes this remark that I find no guilt in him. So the Roman leaders find no guilt in Jesus. Okay, and so now we're in chapter 23. Let's see, let me get I'll just put verse 4 because that's the first mention of it, but it keeps continuing on there, right? In verse 4, he says, I find no guilt in him. He goes to Herod. Now, why does Pilate send him to Herod? Right, because he was a Galilean, which is back to our first thing here, that because he's from Galilee, that he could have possibly done his Passover that day earlier using that Galilean calendar. And so Herod's jurisdiction is Galilee. So, and one of the funniest things in this is how these two become friends afterwards. So, what do you think is at work here? Why do you think they become friends? They actually had been, because they're kind of what? Yes. Yeah, right. And before, though, Herod and Pilate were both governors, right? Just of different jurisdictions, correct? And so do you think they saw each other as rivals, kind of like high school sports? Oh, you're from this city and I'm from this city and we don't like you, and or you're from this high school and we're from this high school. And so there apparently was some kind of rivalry going on between these two. I did do some research, I'm not going to go into it, but it was very interesting, particularly Pilate. Really not a good guy. I mean, really vicious, mean, horrible man. So it's interesting to me knowing that he in this thing repeatedly tries to wash his hands of the crucifixion of Jesus. He does not want to do this. He resists it at every turn. However, in the end, what does he do? He caves. Why do you think he caves? Yeah. So he does it for politically expedient reasons, right? He's trying to please the people. He doesn't want to see a stir get stirred up. Oh, sorry. So sorry. I should have turned that off. I thought I had my ring. I won't miss it, right, when I'm shopping. I just changed it recently because I had a different one on there, and it was Toy Story, and I could never hear it. It seemed like it just disappeared in my head. Anyway, okay, sorry. All right, so Roman leaders, they find no guilt in Jesus, but they give in to the crowds. Now, what did you learn about the crowds that you found interesting? Yeah. They would not listen to reason. And it just blows my mind. I see so many parallels to some of the things that I see going on in our world today, where the evidence is not there. There's no reason to. It's not breaking any laws. You know, they've investigated. Not only have they investigated, he investigated once, then Herod investigated, then he investigated again, and 3 times they came back and said the guy is not guilty. Can't we do something else? How about, hey, there's this great law, right? What is it? On this day, I'm supposed to do what? Release somebody. They had a tradition in the city that the Jews had somehow managed to get them to do this, and they had a tradition of releasing the scapegoat, so to speak, right? And the parallels to the priesthood and so forth are very interesting in that, too. If we had time, it'd be nice to look at that. But so he tries to get out of it, but they don't let him. The crowds are insistent. And in the end, what are the crowds really, they go so far as to be willing to do what? And it might have been in some of our cross-referencing. What is the crowds willing to say about him being convicted? Yes. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine? Let that blood be on me and my children.
Gee, it seems awful like when they went before the Mount Sinai and said, we will do this, if they sprinkled the blood on them, and they're publicly making the statement, we will take this.
Well, we will do this, Lord, and then turned right around and disobeyed. Yeah, built a golden calf before Moses even got down with the tablets. Unbelievable. Okay, so they're demanding that he punish Jesus, and he says, well, how about if I do this? Why? What evil has this man done? I have found in him no guilt demanding death. Therefore, I will punish him and release him. Is that okay? I'll punish him. Is that good enough? No, not good enough. Because what? They want him dead, right? All right, so Pilate then pronounces a sentence at their demand in verse 24. So that's 23:24. So he gives in to the crowds, and so then they're going to crucify him. Now, I found the next section really interesting. After Pilate submits to that mob rule, 26 to 31. At first I've divided it up, but then I put it together because what's going on in 26 to 31? Where's Jesus at? They led him away, right? They had seized him. Now, we're not going into the details. A lot has gone on from here to here. What have they done to Jesus? They've scourged him. He was scourged. He was beaten. He was mocked. He had a crown of thorns. They paraded him. In kingly wear, right? Putting a robe on him and a crown of thorns, and put him out there and said, "Here's your king. Here's your king." So Jesus had been through so much, and I am not going to go into a lot more on the details on that, only because Kay probably will on her video. She will. She's real theatrical. She loves to do that, and she will probably make you weep, and it'll probably be difficult to watch some of it. But anyway, okay, so Jesus has been through all this horrible stuff. Now in verse 26, they're leading him away. As they're leading him away, there's a man who? Cyrene. Yeah, Simon of Cyrene. They're seeing him come from the country, and they place on him the cross to carry behind Jesus. Why do you think that is? He probably can hardly walk at this point. I cannot imagine. A scourging before crucifixion is generally reserved for the most wicked of their death penalty people. But one of the authors that I read, one of the commentaries, made a note, and he said, in many ways, this probably expedited the death so that the timing on this was correct. And so in the horror of it is also a merciful thing, yes. The fact that when they came to check the men that were on the cross, as a matter of fact, to take them down, right? They were surprised, weren't they, when they came to Jesus? And what did they have to do to the two men on each side of him? They had to break their legs in order to end their lives, but Jesus was already dead. All right, so, but this part here in between, he's now on the way to the cross. He's been beaten unmercifully to the point that he can't carry all of his cross. Someone is designated to help him, but along the way he gets into a conversation of all things, right? These women are following and they're mourning. Tell me what you see going on in this. What happened here?
Well, aren't those the women? I mean, they always paid them either that or the women in the city for all the funerals. They would be the mourners and lamenters and squeal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there were probably some like that were kind of the designator mourners. In particular, one of the things I read said that if they were going to crucify a Jew, if the Romans crucified Jews, there was always a group of mourners. It'd be kind of like a ministry that you have at the church. You know, the bee that sows. Well, they have a group that goes to mourn when the Romans would crucify their own Jewish people. I know that sounds horrible, but that was one of their ministries. So there was a group of women who were mourners, but there were also other mourners, right? There were probably just some of the people of the general town that were around and came and joined the group. There may have also been some who were part of Jesus's group, right? That may have been in there as well. So it's a mix of people, but they are mourning. But what is Jesus's response? Don't worry, I'm going to resurrect. 3 days, I'll be out of here. Don't you worry. No? Isn't that interesting? Anytime you say that, you see this little phrase, for behold, the days are coming. What does that remind you of, Precept students? Revelation study, right? On that day, in this day, a day is coming, right? So, yes. And so he actually makes a prophetic utterance about what time? The end times. So he takes their situation in the moment and he says, look, stop mourning for me. You start mourning for your children, because you know what? Down here at the end of history, there's going to be something even greater that happens. And woe to you. Yeah, whoa, Lisa's got it exactly. I thought that was very interesting. So Jesus's mind of clarity and being able to, first of all, perceive the hearts because he's God. So he sees their need. He sees where they're at spiritually, and he reaches right into there. And for us, it seems like an odd conversation to have in this moment, but he knows the heart and the mind of these people, and he wants to make sure they understand this. This may be a sad moment, but you stop mourning for me. I'm telling you, there's going to come a day when you're going to be mourning for yourselves and mourning for your own children. And so, behold, the days will come when they will say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Boy, is that ever, that's a lament if there isn't one, right? And they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Now, where have we seen that? That's right out of Revelation, right? Chapter 6, verse 16 has that. It's also mentioned in Hosea 10 and Isaiah 2, all in reference to that day that's coming, in that day. So he actually pulls a scripture verse right out of a prophetic prophecy for the future, all right, for the end times. And he says, for if they do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? Now, that was a little tough verse. Did anybody kind of iron through that to figure out what exactly he meant?
Isn't it? If they don't accept, I mean, if you don't see me in the kingdom now, when I'm here in clear view, back, you know,
At the end of the age,
when there ain't nothing and no word from God,
right,
and then all these things happen.
right,
The thing is, they knew it was from God
yeah,
in Revelation 6. They knew it was pronounced
yes.
on them.
Okay, so
They denied it.
here it's what was going on there. This lament, it was a well-known lament. And he was saying, look, he puts it to the end time event that's going to come upon the world in the future. He's saying right now in the days when the tree is green, meaning I'm here, the word of God is here, the kingdom of God is being pronounced to you. The time is opportune for salvation for you and for your children. And if in this day when the horrors of the world around you are not like they're going to be one day, certainly in 70 AD there's going to be a really bad horror for them, but also at the end of the age, which is really what he's alluding to. So he's speaking about the end of the age. The dry tree is speaking at the end of the age. When the end of the age comes, and this kingdom is going to be fully rejected, and guess what? Who's not going to be here? The church, the light of the world. Now, there are going to be witnesses, however, so don't ever fret. God will have those 144,000 from each of the tribes. He'll have the two primary witnesses who will be in Jerusalem, and they will preach for 3.5 years. All those things we learned. So there are going to be witnesses, but he's saying that's when the tree is going to be dry. Right now it's green. And he says, don't weep for me, weep for yourselves, because there's a day coming. And if you don't accept the gospel that I brought to you, you're going to face that day and the horrors of it as a people. Not specifically them, obviously, but their children's children. Okay, so Jesus warns, behold, the days are coming. I found that one was interesting. I just wanted to talk through that because it seemed kind of a strange thing, but it also just shows you the clarity of Jesus and his heart. He was concerned for their eternal salvation and the salvation of their children and their children's children after them. And he wanted them to understand, you can weep for me, but you better be weeping for you. There's a day coming of judgment. Right now it's a day of salvation, but there's a day of judgment. When I come again, it's for judgment. All right. So then what we see in 32 to 38, Jesus does what? Mm-hmm. Yes. And as horrible as they're being to him, they're mocking him, they're taking his clothing and garments and distributing them. People are sneering, it says. The rulers were sneering at him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself if this is the Christ of God, his chosen one. And they're just seeing this ridicule going on. And yet it says in 34, what did Jesus do? But Jesus was saying, Father, forgive them. So we see a warning in the first part of it. Now we see an act of forgiveness, of real mercy, just saying, look, they just don't see what's happening. They don't get it, right? Even his own disciples didn't fully have a comprehension yet because it hadn't been revealed to them. But these people were many of them were in total rejection of it. And he was saying, Father, forgive them. Then we enter into this next one in 39 to 43. One of the criminals, he has two criminals, one on his right, one on his left. And what goes on here is very interesting. What happens?
One was mocking him, and the another one was acknowledging that he was Christ and said, please remember me when you go into your kingdom, which was also, I thought, very profound because he knew very well where Jesus was.
Obviously, he had been around and heard about this man, Jesus. He had to have known about for one thing, what was on the sign over Jesus' head? King of the Jews. And so these criminals, even if maybe they hadn't heard it before, they were now seeing that this was a man who was claiming to be Messiah, the Christ. He was the King of the Jews. They were waiting on this one to come. So with his knowledge, maybe even in just that moment he was gathering the information. But it could also be that he had had enough hearsay from conversations prior, because Jesus had been around circulating and word was traveling, and to the point that the council there was wanting to kill him. So in any event, however he came through the knowledge, he came to the right end, didn't he? He came to conclude Jesus is claiming to be the Christ, and he says, when you come into your kingdom, remember me. So what is the response? Yes. And he said to him, truly, I say to you, today you should be with me in paradise. Now we have a conversation to be had about the homework on paradise. What did you think? Did it help you? No. What did you conclude when you looked at the information she gave you? What she gave you were the places in Scripture where the word paradise is used. True, right? But what's interesting is, has Luke already given us an account that gives us a better insight about where it is that he's going to be? Where does he say he's going to go? And when? Today. Today you're going to see me in paradise, right? Okay, so let's put this up here. Today you shall be with. So he sees, so we have the cross, and he says, today you shall be with me in paradise. Okay, and that is verse 43, right? 23:43. All right. So now what we need to do is say, okay, so who's going to be with him is the criminal, right? And he's going to be with Jesus in paradise. But now what do we know about Jesus after he dies? What is supposed to transpire? 3 days and 3 nights because of the sign of Jonah. So Luke has told us on a couple of different times. I think chapter 18 was the big one. I'm not sure. But he says, you should be with me, he shall be with you in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. Then if he's going to go to the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, he says, you shall be with me today there. So wherever he's going into the belly of the earth is this place called paradise, right? Not what was shown to us in our homework was what? Paradise. The heaven, the new heaven and the new earth, which, by the way, comes into being when? At the end of the 1,000-year reign. Okay, so what you can do with that part of your homework is just kind of put an X on it and say, this is speaking of the future heaven and earth. And is it true that's called paradise? Yes. It's the paradise of God. It's yes. But the word paradise simply means garden, I think. I think by definition. Anybody look it up?
A garden with a wall.
A garden with a wall. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, okay. So it's a garden with a wall. So and paradise, simply, the implication behind it is exactly what you think it is. What does your mind go to when you think about paradise? Garden of Eden, someplace that's nice, someplace that's happy, someplace that you want to be, right? A good place, a nice place. Okay, so if we go back to Luke 16, we saw a picture of what it was like when people die, because Jesus is about to die. This man on the cross next to him is going to die, and after death, this man will be with Jesus in paradise, okay? So we're going to go to Luke 16, and let's just kind of draw real quickly a visualization of what we're seeing here. We know that there was a rich man, right? And the rich man was, when he died, where did he go? He went to Hades, so we know this place is called Hades. Okay, and there's a rich man. And how is that place that he goes described? Torment. Okay, and the next thing we learn is that there's a place that when Lazarus goes, it's not the same place, right? And what is the description in Luke 16 about how these two places are separated? A great chasm. So there's this great chasm, whatever that is, that separates them. Okay? And then there's a place where Lazarus goes, right? So we have Lazarus. And who is he with there? What is this place called? Bosom of Abraham. Yeah, because I've kind of figured out a couple of things on this. Okay. Now, I'll talk to you about it in more details. You get more details later. Okay, so I guess so this place is called the bosom of Abraham. And Jesus, now I'm going to erase this so that we've got Jesus here, we've got the cross. And he says, today you should be with me in where? Paradise. Where do you think he's going if he dies? And the man is going to go with him. Just like Lazarus, when Lazarus dies, this man is going to go somewhere where Lazarus went, right? Does that make logical sense? Correct? So if Lazarus is in the bosom of Abraham, it's a place where, by the way, he can get water to put on the tongue of the rich man, but he can't because of the chasm between them. It's forbidden, right? So once you go there, by the end of Luke 16, what does it say about him wanting people to go back and give this message to his brothers and warn them? He says, what about the people who want to leave that place? You can't leave once you're there. There's a verse that says, destined to die once and after this to face judgment. And once you're in this place, according to Luke 16, you can't leave it unless you have some kind of special permission, right? You don't leave this. The people are relegated into this. Therefore, the paradise definition of what? It's a what? It's a garden with a wall around it, okay? So this place is the paradise. Well, not necessarily, but I know you guys want all my answers in one day. Okay, let me tell you what happened is, one of the things that kept annoying me was it kept saying that the rich man would look up. Okay, so then you'd have to stack them, right? And then the other thing is I thought, well, if he looks up, what if he's in a different place? If it's a circle, anywhere he looks up is looking up, right? That's number one. Number two, at the end of the age, it talks about from the belly of the earth, right? So this is the belly of the earth. And if this is the earth, all here, the big circle around the outside, this is all earth. Too much thinking. But at the end of the age, it says that they come out of the belly of the earth, and the earth is then consumed. So they're in the middle, in the belly of the earth. Paradise is here above them, and therefore they can always look up. That's the only reason I changed it. Okay, but you could do it the other way. The other way I was doing it, little puffy clouds like this, a chasm in between and another puffy cloud, right?
The paradise was higher.
One was higher than the other, so he could look up. Yeah, yeah. But it doesn't always work. If Abraham traveled down here, then he would not be looking up. He'd be looking down. So if he's in the middle, he's always looking up. Okay, that was my only reason. Okay, so now, I know it's too detailed for you. Well, mainly, the main thing is because it's the belly of the earth. 3D. I know, it's not as pretty on here as it is on when I color it with my colored pencils. That looks much better. Okay, so now, don't distract me. We've got to stay on task. Okay, so now, he says to him, today in paradise. Okay? So Jesus goes down into paradise, and one of these criminals goes with him, right? So now these two are today in paradise. And then what we know, according to, let me find it, the other one. Matthew 12:40 was one of them. Also in Luke 11, also talks about the sign of Jonah. But I'm going to give you the Matthew one, because Matthew is most declarative, I think. I'm going to put it over here. Matthew 12:40. The Son of Man, the sign of Jonah, so you can kind of merge those thoughts, and it'd be 3 days and 3 nights in belly of earth. Right? The other thing is this. If Jesus is 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth, when he resurrects, does anybody remember what he says to Mary when Jesus does resurrect? There you go. You know it too well, Celeste. So Jesus appears before her, and he says, "Do not touch me."
One of the translations says, "Quit clinging."
Quit clinging.
Like she was touching him. So I'm going, wait a minute. I like the first one because he's saying my blood cannot be messed up because I have to go
Right.
put it on the.
But remember, it's not going to get messed up. He's that powerful. Right. So what happens is he resurrects. After 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth, he resurrects. He appears first to Mary. You're going to see this in other references, and I'm not going to take you because it's going to take too long. I'm just going to talk you through it. But he sees Mary, and he says to her, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." The purpose behind that has to do with the priesthood. And remember when the priest on that day when he was going to give this propitiation at the altar inside the Holy of Holies, that he had to be purified, he had to have all this cleansing, and he wasn't allowed to touch anybody or be anywhere around anyone. He spent the whole morning in prayer and doing all these washings so that he was as close as possible, humanly possible, to represent the great high priest who Jesus would be, right? So when Jesus resurrects, he is now that great high priest, as Hebrew teaches us in 8, 9, and 10. He is going to go where? To the Father. So here he says, "Don't touch me because I've not yet been to the Father." So guess where paradise is not? It's not in heaven. He's not been there yet. Good point. Yeah, I thought so. I thought so. How observant. "Don't touch me. I've not yet ascended to the Father." So the paradise he was in is where? In the same place as Lazarus is explaining to us, and the story of Lazarus and the rich man in Luke 16. It's here in this paradise in the belly of the earth. Before the cross, all people went here to this place.